If you look at some of the national polls, there's some new ones that came out. There's a Gallup poll that just came out where Santorum is leading by double digits against Mitt Romney. And then in some of the other ones, though, if you're asked, who do you think will be selected as the person? Who do you think will beat President Barack Obama? Well, in that one, it's almost 2-1 that Romney's beating Santorum. All these mixed opinions and all these mixed views, and some people saying that maybe Mitt Romney may not win Michigan, which is a key state, his home state. Father was there for governor, his wife, from there. I mean, there's so many connections. It was almost a gimme before for him, people thought. And now he is fighting tooth and nail to try to win his home state. And it's making people talk about the idea of a brokered convention. Lots of rumblings of this, that, basically the party bosses could essentially choose some other candidate if none of the remaining ones on the Republican ballot are catching fire with voters. So is this a real thing? Well, my next guest says this should not take place. And joining us now is Congressman Thaddeus McCotter, who was also a candidate for just a few months last year, also running for president himself. So he knows the field and he knows what it's like to run and be right there in the thick of it all. Congressman, how are you?
How are you? Thanks for having me on.
I think this is an important topic, and I'm glad you spoke out. I thought you would, blogged out. You put it in the blogosphere, and I thought this was really great, where you were saying, look, all of these guys, you've been there, and basically talked about the mettle and the, and the substance of the guys who are in the race. So why do you think it's important it doesn't go to a brokered convention?
Rita, I started out as a precinct delegate in the Republican Party a long time ago. And you got to see the importance and the backbone of the party was the grassroots. And right now, we have 4 contenders who had the courage to enter the race, and you have all their dedicated supporters, all the people who voted for them so far in the caucuses and the primaries. But essentially, a GOP establishment orchestrated convention would disregard, would cast aside, and substitute their judgment for those sovereign citizens and party members that have already participated and those who will. As a Republican who fundamentally finds the concept of elitism repugnant, I don't know how the Republican Party could have this type of convention, could turn on any of the 4 remaining contenders, come up with somebody new, and then turn around and say to the American public, but we really trust the voters.
Yeah, and you bring up 2 interesting points, Congressman. First, on the candidates, and let's focus on that, because I think, and obviously secondary on the voters, and maybe it's obviously the reverse for priority because we care about what the voters think. But on the candidates, they've worked hard. They've got the machine in place, and you've spent time with them all. Do you think any of these guys could be president or have the qualities that could be?
Well, I think they can, but importantly, Rita, it's not what I think. I'll cast what I think in the primary here in Michigan.
Because, people are coming out and saying, well, they're not, the field is weak, or maybe they're not, and look, I disagree. I think they're all, all have a lot of substance to them. But what do you say to those people who say, well, maybe we don't have the best candidates there?
Well, then it's too bad if the candidates that you would have liked didn't enter the fray in the first place and have the fortitude or the wherewithal to do what the 4 gentlemen that are still standing did, or my colleagues who also ran and have dropped out since have done. And one of the things that I always find is so interesting, you would think that as Republicans who have an understanding of human history and experience, which we derive largely from Edmund Burke, is that when somebody doesn't run, they always look better than when they do. The nature of a primary is inherently difficult amongst party members because it's a fight in the family. And what you're seeing is people trying to differentiate themselves within the Republican philosophy. While people who stand on the sidelines, no one's going after their records, no one's talking about what their vision is or lack thereof, so they get to be a white knight. And I think that one of the things that I find so frustrating is that the Republican Party that is supposed to understand how processes work, supposed to respect sovereign American people's voice, and supposed to understand a little something about political decisions and respecting those that are cast by the voters, will be willing to talk about how we can go find a white knight who didn't have the fortitude to get in the race in the first place. And as you know better than anybody, when you're going up against Barack Obama and the media establishment, you better have somebody who's been through this and hasn't decided to sit it out until they are summoned in this to serve their country in this time of transformational, difficult change.
No, you're right. They have to be well prepared and sort of gone through the grinder. That's why I think, Congressman, you see all the people saying, oh, there's too many debates, there's too many this. I think all the candidates are better candidates for it because it will be a very tough fight against President Barack Obama. There's going to be a lot of money on the other end against them.
And I think about it. I hate to use sports analogies, but think about it. If your team is practicing, do you play the guy who doesn't practice in the game? Or Or do you want the people who practiced against each other, who's practiced against the best, who the coaches, in this case the voters, have determined would be the best people to play on the field? Armchair quarterbacks rarely do well when put in game situations.
Yeah, no matter how skilled they are. Do you think some of it is sort of creating mischief, that maybe somebody feels like, oh, maybe their candidate didn't do it or they didn't do it? What do you think is sort of behind the grumblings of a brokered convention?
I think what you're seeing is not from the grassroots themselves, because they understand that these are the choices and they've had a long process. But I think that the brokers themselves, having failed to put other people into the race or coax them in, which I think is a positive development, because I don't want somebody who has to be begged to be president of the United States leaving us, is they're very concerned about maintaining their control over the party. And I think it shows their propensity to substitute good judgment for the people who do the hard work of going door to door, who make the phone calls, who take to the social network to get their messages for their candidates out, who take the time to go to a caucus or take the time to go to a primary. Those are the people whose judgment we have to trust. Because as I said in my big government piece, Rita, a Republican Party that distrusts its own primary voters will be distrusted by a general election voter.
Yeah, no, let's get to that. And I think that that's a very powerful point, Congressman, because, and suddenly it's also saying, the other point too is, what about all these states that have had primaries before? And then suddenly you go, okay, well, I guess your votes don't matter. Here's who we picked. Do you think there will be a lot of people turned off in that case too?
Well, you are absolutely right. And this talk was coming out last weekend, and now, while Michigan, my home state, is voting, and my fellow Republicans in Michigan are casting their determination.
Yeah, can you imagine how they feel? Well, we may not care about you, you know?
Yeah, it's a very cavalier attitude by the very establishment. Well, and if you don't care about your own party's voters, how can you care about independents? How can you care about blue-collar Democrats? So to me, it seems that we're sending the wrong signal. We're adding to, it's a primary process. It's already going to be a bit muddy. It's already going to be a bit muddled. And you don't want anybody coming in talking about the potential of orchestrating an election for somebody who's not even running, because it just adds to consternation and makes the smile on the Democrats' faces bigger.
Where do you see, by the way, it headed in Michigan, too, while I have you, Congressman, because it is your state, a state you know very well. It's been fascinating to see, although we know we've been hearing some reports, I think, a lot of, mixed up and down in the polls. I mean, as you know, these polls can change on a dime. What's your sense of where it's headed?
I think Mr. Rasmussen put out a poll recently showing Senator Santorum slightly ahead of Governor Romney. Full disclosure, I'm a Romney supporter at this point. But he also showed that 35% of the electorate could change their mind in the last few days. We've seen this in other states.
Oh, absolutely.
So I think that what's happening is the American people are taking their decisions in this primary very seriously, just as they will in the general election. They understand that the nation is at a very important period of time. They want to make sure they get it right, and they're waiting until they have to make that final determination, weighing all the evidence. And in many ways, I find that most heartening.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I'm glad to see so many people interested in watching, and the debate numbers have been huge. It's wonderful to see people involved in the process, and I think there's some great candidates out there. Congressman McCotter, thank you so much, and I think you raised some very important points. So many people have been talking about this convention, and I think you give a perspective, and I think a lot of credit to the folks who are out there working incredible hours to try to make it happen and run for presidency, which is I think, a very difficult job, and we're lucky to have people who care that much.
Oh, thank you, Rudy. You're very kind.
Thank you very much, Congressman. Congressman McCotter, Thaddeus McCotter, Republican of Michigan, where the primary is going to be coming up right around the corner.